This is the Q4 Graph participant update. So we'll chat about all things that have happened in the Graph ecosystem. Just a quick disclaimer, as always, there are no forward-looking statements or future statements in this document. My name is Tegan Klein. For those of you that don't know me, I am the co-founder of Edge and Node. We're the initial team behind the Graph, one of many teams now, and I lead business at Edge and Node. So the Graph, it's crazy to think that the Graph is only 2 years old. I know it took Ethereum about 5 years to hit mass adoption. A lot of that was because of tooling like the Graph, but I'm excited to see what's to come. And with that celebration, the Graph advocates who are all around the world, there's hundreds of them, they hosted events in different cities across the globe. So San Francisco, Argentina, Amsterdam, Dubai, Singapore, and Nigeria. And if you're ever interested in hosting a Graph event, just let us know because we would love to support you through that. The participant growth within the Graph ecosystem is growing. Everything is up and to the right. And this is without unlocking a lot of things like a layer 2 solution to reduce gas costs, which I'll get to later in this presentation. But you see here that subgraphs grew from 24% quarter over quarter on the Graph's decentralized network. So we're kind of putting the Graph's hosted service in the rearview mirror and all eyes are on the network. And it's great to see the growth here. But with that, what's even more exciting is that there was over 51% quarter over quarter growth when it comes to the GRT query fees on the network. So that's double the growth when it comes to subgraphs. And then indexers, with the launch of the MIPS program from the foundation, we've seen incredible growth when it comes to indexers. And we closed out the quarter at 291 indexers who are helping to serve queries for the Graph network. And it's permissionless to participate as an indexer. And that number is much higher today, which is super exciting because they really are kind of the backbone of Web3. And then delegation, there's over 11,000 delegators on the Graph network today, which is exciting. And we saw over 9% quarter over quarter growth. It's always great to invite more delegators into the ecosystem. It's a pretty easy way to get involved in the Graph network and subsequently get involved in Web3. Messari took note of all things Graph related in their Q4 State of the Graph report. If you haven't checked that out, make sure to do so. You can see all of the data and analytics in that report. And why is all of this growth happening? It's a great question to ask. So when it comes to the hosted service versus the decentralized network, we are actually seeing on average better latency, better uptime, and the query success rate. So it's a pretty remarkable moment to just take a look at the network compared to the hosted service. A lot of people have told us, decentralization will never be faster, better, cheaper. And we're proving that wrong because the decentralized network is actually beating the hosted service. There are over 600 subgraphs on the decentralized network, 121 new subgraphs in Q4. There's been a lot of effort by the entire ecosystem, but also Kyle on the business side, really pushing for migrations on the decentralized network. So it's really exciting to see all the growth here, and the flywheel effect is starting to take place with 24% quarter over quarter growth. There's so many subgraphs on the decentralized network that are powering these applications. And it's great to help applications decentralize their indexing and query layer, especially with all of the scrutiny that we're seeing. It's really important to decentralize your entire Web3 stack. And a shout out to all of these projects that have taken that very seriously. So a few notables here is just Balancer. They're powering their Ethereum Balancer V2 front end using their subgraph from the Graph. And then Snapshot, so much voting goes through Snapshot when it comes to DAOs, and the Graph is powering Snapshot at the indexing and query layer, and then Sushi as well, among many, many more. So you can take a look at all of that because it's public on the network. When we look at query fees, so over 960,000 GRT queries came on to the network in Q4, and this is really steadily increasing, as you can see the chart here. And we have a focus on kind of the number of query fees that are flowing through the network. And this is just when it comes to the application's front end. So what we've noticed is that there's actually a lot of third parties that are querying the subgraphs. And once we close out phase 2, we can move that third party traffic onto the decentralized network, which is really exciting. And we're getting closer there. When it comes to developers, almost 40,000 developers at the close of the year last year. And so really exciting to see more developers participating in the decentralized network and getting involved there. And when it comes to indexers, so 72 indexers went live on the network in Q4. As I mentioned, indexers really are the backbone of Web3, and it's a great way to kind of get revenue if you have a talented team of DevOps. So if you are interested in becoming an indexer on the Graph network, we're here to support you, and the foundation has the MIPS program running, which is a really exciting way to get involved and also to meet other indexers in the ecosystem and really dive into that community. On the delegator side, as a delegator myself, we saw it took about 2 years to reach 10,000 delegators and less than 3 months to hit 11,000 delegators. So it's exciting to see that ecosystem growing and more people getting involved in delegation to help secure the network. Multi-chain progress has been progressing. So there are now 2 chains on the network. And what's exciting is that all of this growth has happened just within these 2 chains. And there are over 39 chains on the hosted service between layer 1s, layer 2s, side chains. And we're really working to get those onto the decentralized network as quickly as possible. And now that we have the two use cases with Ethereum and Gnosis, we're ramping that up more quickly. And so the chains that have been announced so far to go live next are Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, Avalanche, and Celo. And if you have opinions on which chains you want to see go live on the network when, we would love to hear which chains you're most excited about. We are constantly improving, and there's so much to do. We really want to make the decentralized network as easy, if not easier to use than a SaaS product. And so with that, one of our big focuses right now is on Arbitrum billing. There are multiple phases to us migrating the protocol to Arbitrum to reduce gas costs. And we've begun this process. So what's exciting is that there's no more manual bridging. So this reduces a lot of the steps when it comes to what the developers need to face. And then also it reduces costs. And this will reduce costs when we finally when we finish migrating to Arbitrum. It will reduce gas costs for indexers, delegators, and curators, which will really lower the barrier to entry when it comes to participating in the Graph network. And then the fiat on-ramp. So we're at the final stages of choosing a provider. Stay tuned for that announcement. And we are working on that integration in the background. But this will really help when it comes to things like subscriptions over time, so that you can, as a developer, you can just subscribe and not have to worry about constantly upping your balance. Also as a third-party user of these applications. So double clicking into Arbitrum here, we have 3 phases of this process. So we have the testnet and mainnet. Phase 2 is enabling indexing rewards. And phase 3, we finally migrate the protocol to Arbitrum and reduce those gas costs. Substreams is very much gaining steam. We are super excited for the next steps in moving Substreams into production. This will help a lot of the larger applications that are on the hosted service. When they migrate to the decentralized network, it will really reduce the speed that the indexers need to sync those subgraphs onto the network. So we'll see the Substreams will unlock a lot more migrations, which is very exciting. There are many priorities that we have in Q1. So a big focus is getting those chains onto the network and announcing other chains to come, working on that fiat on-ramp, as we mentioned, the Arbitrum layer 2 integration to reduce gas costs, and then of course, improving the experience on the network for developers and users when it comes to the fiat on-ramp integration. And migrations. Migrations have been a huge focus for us. We really want to get to a place where we are comfortable fully deprecating the hosted service and getting everyone onto the network. And we've really been turning the crank there. One exciting update is that the Edge and Node House of Web3 opened. This is in San Francisco in the Presidio. So we're kind of putting a stake in the ground, bringing San Francisco back to life. So if you are in the Bay Area at any time, reach out to us. We would love to get you access to this space. It's super beautiful. And we really want anyone who's co-creating in the Web3 ecosystem to come and experience the House of Web3. With that, I will pass it over to Brandon Ramirez, the interim CEO of Edge and Node and co-founder of the Graph.
Hey folks, great to be here. Thanks, Tegan.
Oop, I'm not able to hear you, Brandon. I'm not sure if it's just me or.
I can hear you.
How's that? Can you hear me, Tegan? I think it might be on your end. I'm seeing some folks
I'm not able to hear you. Is anyone else able to hear Brandon? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear him.
All right, I'll carry on, and hopefully this is at least making it to the recording for everyone. So I got a couple dense slides, so bear with me, but I think we got the time. If we can go to the next slide. I'd love to share some updates on parts of the roadmap being actively worked on in the Graph ecosystem right now. You know, as Tegan mentioned, since the Graph launched, we've been fortunate to have some incredible core developers come into the ecosystem, really rounding out a lot of the specialties like DevOps, big data, high performance architecture, cryptography, reinforcement learning. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that specialization really come to bear with the parts of the roadmap that are hitting production readiness this quarter. So from Semiotic, which is a team that specializes in cryptography and reinforcement learning, we have AutoAgora v2. This is a tool that lets indexers better express their pricing for specific query shapes based on the relative cost of serving those queries. So that might be a little intimidating kind of to wrap your head around, but effectively this means better price discovery in the query market, more efficiency in the query market, and ultimately it's going to lead to better performance in the network. The next bullet down, again, a little bit technical, but the team at GraphOps has been working on a system called GraphCast, which is a native peer-to-peer messaging and gossip layer for indexers in the Graph network that can act as a platform for a whole host of applications for improving the network. The first one of those that's coming to market this next quarter is called Proof of Indexing Radio. And this is a way for indexers to actually cross-check indexing work with one another in real time as a way of hardening the determinism and data integrity in the network. To basically make sure that the Graph continues to be sort of best in class when it comes to data integrity and verifiability, which is a huge part of the value proposition of building on a Web3 platform in the first place. On the Edge and Node side, for the last I'd say 3 to 6 months of the previous year, a huge focus was on quality of service, and as Tegan showed, we've hit some pretty incredible milestones when it comes to the quality of service in the network, especially as it compares to the hosted service. The big outstanding piece of feedback that we continue to hear from developers is just around the ergonomics of billing. And Tegan already kind of mentioned this with recurring payments, fiat on-ramp providers. Really, we should be able to have a SaaS-like billing experience in the network while still being completely Web3 native, avoiding vendor lock-in, avoiding platform risk, all the things that developers are, were rejecting with Web 2 in the first place. And a big enabler for this is going to be the Arbitrum billing migration, right? Or the Arbitrum protocol migration, rather. This is going to make transaction fees across the board much cheaper, but it also enables new user experiences and economic mechanisms that would have been prohibitively expensive to implement on layer 1. Even things like Gelato integration for sort of recurring recurring meta transactions that are performed by third parties to kind of, bring crypto native recurring payments, to the graph. While a big focus of the ecosystem right now is the migration to L2 and things that are sort of enablers for making the decentralized network work really well, I do want to emphasize that there are some meaningful improvements still coming for subgraph developers. A big one being better support for off-chain data sources. So this is a huge ask for like the NFT use case. We do support this in a limited way today, but it's without getting too much into the weeds, it's a little bit brittle, and this is a much more hardened implementation that would be usable for a whole host of IPFS data-based applications, including NFTs. The Guild, another core developer that has come in, they're sort of leading experts in GraphQL development, some of the leading contributors to popular open source GraphQL libraries. They're actually stepping up and starting to make more and more contributions directly into GraphNode, which is very exciting, as that's been a place where largely EduNode has been the main contributor. And they're working on things like GraphQL nested sorting, relay style pagination. If you're not a GraphQL developer, these are really big quality of life improvements. GraphQL nested sorting, I know our product engineers have been asking for a year and a half or so now. The relay style pagination allows for better integration with widely used tooling in the GraphQL ecosystem. It leads to better API lifecycle management because it makes it easier to sort of deprecate or add fields to your schema without making breaking changes. Supports better caching. So a lot of improvements still coming for the subgraph developers, even as we remain laser focused on the decentralized network. On the streaming fast side, another core developer in the graph ecosystem, the big focus is multi-service in the graph. So Tegan mentioned Substreams, Firehose. Those are getting very close to production ready. We've had some great experiments with the Uniswap subgraph, which, depending on how you approach it, can take weeks or months to index today. The latest experiments using Substreams enabled subgraphs is that the indexing time is down to about 80-ish hours. That's using sequential inserts. And the early experiments with batch inserts indicates that we might be able to get that down to around 7 or 8 hours. Coming from, again, weeks or months previously to index. So it's an order of magnitude indexing performance improvement. And I think there's a really interesting narrative when you combine sort of the impact of Substreams-based subgraphs, which I think are the first thing you're going to see land in the network. Eventually, we do want Firehose and Substreams to be first-class citizens in the network themselves. But even with Substreams-based subgraphs, and the standardized subgraphs that Messari's been building. Again, Messari being a new core developer in the graph ecosystem, they're sort of building best-in-class subgraphs for a whole host of Web3 data applications. You start to see the graph becoming the best of both worlds, where in the early days of the graph, there was this big trade-off with really optimizing for user-generated APIs and being a general platform for creating these APIs. But that meant that we weren't hand tuning or hand tailoring any single one of these APIs for a specific set of users' needs. With Messari, we have a core developer that's full-time focus is basically doing that, making sure that we have best-in-class APIs that have been built on the platform. And with Substreams-based subgraphs, we're actually going to see best-in-class performance on those APIs. And so we think a big part of the graph's growth story moving forward and adoption story is going to really be the quote-unquote data consumer, whereas a lot of our time over the last 2 years has been spent optimizing for the API creator. Obviously, both are going to be important moving forward, but we really see the data consumer as this new persona that's kind of coming to the forefront and going to become more and more meaningful over time. And the last bullet I skipped over here was multi-chain expansion. I think Tegan's already given some updates on this. The migration infrastructure providers program, the testnet that's being run by the foundation, has been doing a lot to not only onboard new indexers, but make sure that those indexers are adequately trained on the new chains that we are looking to serve in the network. So expect to see that continue. Next slide, please. This is getting a little bit more into weeds, but a handful of GIPs that for folks that are interested in, you can check out in the forums. One was just going left to right here, the Dispute Manager GIP. This was actually submitted by another third party, which is always exciting to see. Community GIPs get submitted. This one was from a team called Soulbound Labs, and they're actually interested in doing on-chain oracles of subgraph data. And this is a GIP that they wrote to help support their use case, where they wanted to actually be able to introspect the status of disputes and arbitration on-chain so that they could allow their Oracle contract to use that as an input on whether to accept data from a specific index or not. GIP 42 is very much work in progress, but it's really about taking the graph from being a single service protocol, which is subgraphs, where you're indexing your data in, assembly script mappings and querying it via GraphQL, to a multi-service protocol where maybe you were querying for data in SQL or other query languages, or you're indexing, rather than using assembly script mappings, you're indexing using Substreams, or rather than using JSON RPC in your extraction layer, you can use Firehose. So we're really trying to make the graph the place to go for all of your Web3 data needs, even though I think today we really serve the application-specific data use case very, very well with subgraphs. GIPs 37, 43, 46 are all really about the move to L2. So one big update, well, depending on how you look at it, with the move to L2 is a change to the way that indexing rewards are computed. So today, indexing rewards are continuously compounded. So it's a 3% annual issuance based on the current total token supply, and that's sort of at each time step that's being computed. With the move to L2, because of the difficulty of synchronizing the L1 and the L2, we're moving towards a linear calculation of indexing rewards, where on average the issuance rate will be 3%, but between updates, it'll actually decay slightly and will require periodic updates from the Graph Council to keep it at that 3% target. And that's just to really simplify and de-risk the computation of indexing rewards on L2. As you guys know, most of the scary things that we see in Web3 today have to do with bridges and the integrity of bridges, and we want to make it really, really stupid simple to guarantee that the integrity of the total token supply of GRT would be preserved even as you have token rewards being minted on both L1 and L2, that it didn't go above the pre-specified amount. GIP 44, a little bit more technical. It's solving some edge cases with the way that the protocol implements minimum stake. And 46 is really about making sure that indexers, delegators, subgraph developers have a first-class experience migrating their either stake or their curation signal or their subgraphs respectively to L2 when we go full steam ahead with the migration. And with that, I will kick it back to Tegan.
Thank you so much, Brandon, and sorry for the user error there. Thank you. And with that, we just wanted to share a few ways that you all can get involved and help the Graph ecosystem. So we will have a big presence at ETH Denver. So if you are going, please let us know. I also have a Telegram T that I'm happy to add you to as well, if you'll be there. And then of course, always sharing content around the Graph network, anything on Twitter or social media, all around, blog posts. We really encourage it and would love to help amplify anything that you all put out. If there are any podcast opportunities, we're always happy to share. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline, as you've seen. So I'm always happy to amplify that on different podcasts. If you know of any opportunities, please let us know. And inviting your community to become a Graph advocate. If there's anyone that's interested in getting involved in crypto or Web3, that's a great way to kind of get involved and rise up as a leader. There are many roles that we are hiring for, including business development at EdgeNode, developer relations at EdgeNode, site reliability engineer at EdgeNode. GraphOps is hiring a Rust engineer. Streaming Fast is hiring a backend engineer, and at EdgeNode, we're also hiring a database administrator. So feel free to send anyone our way. And always speaking opportunities, workshops, we're here for it all. And reach out to us if you're interested in getting an invite to the House of Web3. A few shout outs. So thank you so much to the Subgraph DAO members and the Graph advocates. Thank you to Christopher for sharing the Cohen report. Thank you to Collider for having Eva speak at your event. I heard it was a really great event and everyone was buzzing about the graph. So thank you so much. Of course, Michael and Craig from Reciprocal Ventures. I'll add Ali in here as well. Thanks so much for helping with the token economics piece. I think we still have education to do, but it's in a good place. And I was recently at an event at Vanderbilt and they said, the graph ecosystem has some of the best token economics in the space. So that was nice, nice to hear from the community. Thank you to CoinFund for all the time, digging in on calls, and of course, the Graph Council for the continued focus on strategy and pushing the protocol forward. So with that, we will go to Q&A.
Hey, Tegan, I can chime in for that, pose the questions, and then you can take them one by one. We've got some really good questions, and naturally they kind of start with migration in general. One is, how is the team feeling about the migration process from the hosted service, and how is user feedback coming in for that?
Yeah, I'll just say, we're starting to see this flywheel effect. We've really been leaning in, all efforts. The Subgraph DAO has also been helping the team with migration. So that's great. And, phase one is coming down the pipeline where we're getting closer to feeling ready, where we can no longer allow subgraphs to even spin up on the hosted service. So that we'll see a big push onto the network there. But Kyle, I'll bounce that question back to you. I know you've kind of been boots on the ground, so would love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. I can give some context as well. I'd say it's such an exciting time because migration's speeding up so fast that it's almost hard to handle everything that's coming in. But what's great is that's permissionless environment, and people are actually even doing it on their own without any handholding from the ecosystem, especially when you compare where the network was at the beginning of, let's say, 2022, when I think it was fewer than 5 projects were using the network in production for their front-end data. And there are now over 130 unique users, many with multiple subgraphs. And it's still just the start of the mass migration to come, because a lot of the subgraphs that are published and attracted indexers on the network, people are just testing until they get comfortable. And then I'd say from a forward-looking point of view, the ecosystem is in active migration talks with over 1,000 projects right now. And of those, over 150 have committed to migrating when their respective chains go live and or testing's done. So it's a very exciting short, near, midterm, and then long-term path to migration. I think just as exciting as anything else, the network, it's really cool seeing the feedback on the ground. The network is an extremely sticky product that people like. And once people migrate over, they aren't reverting back to the hosted service or looking for alternatives like self-hosting. So yeah, again, migrations are picking up fast, and it should be a really incredible 2023. Let's move on to the next one. This was an interesting one. How many active subgraphs are available to migrate on the announced chains once they go live? So that's Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, Avalanche, and Celo. And Tegan, I'm not sure if you have those numbers offhand.
I do, yeah. Yeah, so there's over 1,000 subgraphs that are actively used across those chains. So Polygon, there's 600 at least. Avalanche, there's 200. And I'm just going with the heavily used subgraphs. There are more subgraphs on these chains. Arbitrum at 150, Optimism around 90. And then if we look at Celo, there's about 70. And the team has actually already been in talks with a lot of these subgraphs, getting them ready to migrate. So that's exciting. Kyle, anything you would want to add there?
Yeah, I'd say those numbers you gave, let's say Polygon at 600, those are with a good amount of volume that we're counting, but there's around 2,000 Polygon subgraphs that can migrate and that the ecosystem is getting in touch with and will migrate over time. And that's just Polygon. It's the same thing with BNB chain and others. And so the other numbers you mentioned are just the minimum that are pretty high volume, which is exciting.
Totally. And what's great in just scaling the migration process is leveraging the Subgraph DAO. So Kyle and Simone have really been helping the Subgraph DAO members migrate some of the smaller subgraphs. So that's a great way to just kind of scale the team in a decentralized way.
Yeah, exactly. Subtracting ourselves out of the process and letting the community take over. It's been fun. This is a three-parter, and happy to take it one at a time, but just to set it up, what's the timeline for getting the announced chains integrated with the decentralized network? What about the rest of the hosted service chains? And then how are the ecosystem core devs thinking about chains not currently on the hosted service? How are those going to work down the line?
That's a great question. Yeah. So it really depends on the chain in terms of timeline. So certain chains are easier to run an indexer for than others. If we look at like a Binance Smart Chain, that might be a more difficult chain to run than something like a Gnosis or an Ethereum. So it's really hard to kind of put a specific time on each one. That being said, we really are ramping up the speed at which we are adding chains to the network, adding multiple chains at once with this new announcement. And then when it comes to chains not yet on the network, I would say it really depends on the demand, how many applications are needing that chain. But we can, we have the ability to add chains directly to the network, even if they're not on the hosted service. Brandon, anything you would add there?
Yeah, this is very much sort of emerging conversations, but there's been some talks about maybe structuring this in two waves. So the first wave kind of being like where the majority of usage is today. And I think that's the chains that have been planned as part of the MIP's program reflect about 85% of usage on the hosted service. And then there's this kind of long tail of chains, let's call it 30 or so chains that would potentially be part of the second wave. But as Tegan alluded to, like what we're discovering as we go through that process is that we need to be more clear about the requirements that we push onto these, especially that long tail of chains, because the graph tends to be the tip of the spear when it comes to the developer experience on those chains. But a lot of what allows us to provide that experience really depends on having things like well-supported RPC clients, potentially things like Firehose integration, making sure that they're actually fixing determinism issues on their nodes. And so I think you're going to see a lot more noise from the graph ecosystem, especially with the second wave, and making sure that we're driving best practices engineering from an engineering perspective onto this long tail of chains so that they can be better supported by the graph network. And it actually might be some of the efforts from these chains that becomes the bottleneck, if you will, for getting them supported as first-class citizens in the graph.
Awesome. Brandon, I think the next one might be oriented towards you as well. Any idea when Substreams will be available for everyone to use? And will that be in production at first, or how's that rollout going to be, if you have any insight there?
I've been in this game long enough to not publicly commit to dates. I can give a little bit of color on sequencing. So the easiest wins with respect to Substreams and Firehose are what we're calling Substreams enabled subgraphs, because for Substreams enabled subgraphs, they're basically using Substreams and Firehose as sort of implementation details in the black box of a subgraph to unlock a bunch of performance improvements. But the public interfaces in the network are the same. So we can, with very little lift, support these in the network using the existing protocol economics, the existing APIs, the existing interfaces. What's going to be a bigger lift is what we're calling like full multi-service, which is where you can actually query a Firehose endpoint or a Substreams endpoint directly in the network, or even new types of stores that consume those endpoints. Like the Streaming Fast team has talked a lot about like a key value store, that can be useful for some high performance data pipeline applications. That's going to be a bigger lift. It's going to be a big priority, I think, for EdgeNode and Substreams for the remainder of this year. But predicting dates in an open source, decentralized developer ecosystem is always a challenge. And so I try and steer clear of that.
Smart, Ben. Thanks for the color there. This one is more high level. So what are the existential threats and then opportunities for the graph ecosystem in 2023? Tegan, maybe you should take that one first.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say on the threat side, there are definitely a lot of projects trying to do what the graph does in a centralized way and create a SaaS product. I think, where they're trying to sell that is when it comes to the SLAs or the the service that they get with that. And so we're really ramping up our service, trying to respond as quickly as possible in a decentralized way when it comes to the network. But I do think there is opportunity for us there in improving that response time. And then I would say when it comes to more opportunities, I definitely want to see the graph add balances. I know this is kind of coming down the pipeline. Also an NFT API, we've really been working on that for some time, or at least thinking about it. And then, we just spoke with a very large, well-known company, and there'll be more on this to come soon, but we talked to them about leveraging the graph for their indexing needs, many, many months ago. And, before the bear market hit. And now that the bear market has hit, they told us, we really regret not using you guys. And we are deprecating our entire indexing operation that we tried to spin up in-house. And this is really a common theme. A lot of people think it's super easy to just build your own indexing solution, and it's really not. And it's really hard to kind of keep that uptime. But everyone goes through their own journey in learning that. And if you can just leverage the Graph's decentralized network of nodes, it's a lot easier than spinning it up in-house. So we're working with a lot of large companies that are kind of noticing this now. Brandon, anything you would add?
Yeah, I mean, a couple high-level thoughts. One is I really love the Paul Graham quote that startups don't die due to homicide, they die due to suicide. So I think, for most of us in the graph ecosystem, we're very much just focused on kind of playing the game that we set out for ourselves at the outset. And, generally we try and not index too much on, what our would-be competitors doing. That said, I think, one challenge that the graph has always had is that we are doing things at a greater level of rigor and engineering effort because we are striving to build the functionality that we build in a decentralized way, where determinism is a first-class concern. Whereas if you were sort of doing things as a SaaS product where no one would ever even have the opportunity to see if there was data integrity issues because you're not being compared to other indexers, you can play a little bit more fast and loose. And so I think our challenge is always to make sure that we're maintaining a good pace of adding features and functionality that sort of appeal to developers, while also doing this other huge engineering lift behind the scenes to make sure that these things work in a decentralized way, that we're not reintroducing platform risk, that we're staying true to the values of Web3, that we're providing data determinism. I think we've been really well positioned to do that, as we saw from the updates. The fact that we have best-in-class teams like the Guild, literally full-time focused on the Subgraph developer experience, even as some of the other big core developers are focused on the network migration. But I think that's something that I think about a lot, is how do we balance, both adding new capabilities that appeal to developers while making sure that we're pushing the industry forward with respect to, a decentralized Web3 stack.
Awesome. We had one last question come in, and that was, what's the best way or place to share my Twitter thread about the graph if I have something I want to get out to the community?
Amazing. Yeah, feel free to share it with us if you want our review just for any potential red flags or fact checks. And then if you share that on Twitter and tag Graph Protocol, we can always reshare. And just sharing it to the marketing team involved in the graph ecosystem just allows the graph to reshare it more quickly. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat so you have it.
I think that's that. Thanks for posting that link in the chat as well, Caroline.
Thank you all so much for joining the update today. And if you have any other questions, always feel free to reach out. We really appreciate all the engagement from your side. Thank you so much. Have a great Valentine's Day, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.